But I think to kickstart our conversation, Dr. Donnelly offered to quickly host a poll for us. So over to Dr. Donnelly, if you wish to share your screen. I think you can take our participants through this.
Okay, good. Thanks, Professor Thalder. It's always good after listening to a lot of information for us to just perhaps shake things up a bit. I'm sure those of us presenting would love to know a little bit more about those of you in the audience before we get going. So this is a little tool that you can use on your browser or on your cell phone. You just need to go to the address at the top of the screen, www.menti.com. And as soon as you open it up, you'll enter in the little code that will prompt for you. And then you will be able to plug in your answer to the first of two questions. So www.menti.com, and then you type in the code 64439902, and we should see up on the screen. I'm going to move my Zoom blocks. That people are logging in. Okay.
Come on, everybody, give us your inputs.
Oh, sorry, there we go. Whoops. We've had about 13 people popping in their answers. Quite interesting results there, Professor Thalder. Mostly about a little bit more than half from law and half from the healthcare professions.
Yeah, well, it might still change a bit.
What we'll do is, shall we just start a little countdown and give one more minute
yes,
for people to log in what their backgrounds are?
I wonder how many patent professionals we have in the audience.
That would be interesting. I hope Ms. Chandran's preparing for Mr. Naidu. I've got some interesting questions back to you about owning data.
Indeed.
And patenting data. Right, so it'll close very quickly. I see there's still a few more people that are logging in, so you've still got time. That code will stay up on the screen. Just go to www.menti.com. There we go. So I'm going to move us along to the next question. And we can already see that people have been putting their answers in there.
Yeah.
And we'll give you a few more minutes. It's very interesting to see the kinds of things that people think of when they think. Surveillance comes up, which is an interesting one.
But I think the main words there all seem to be quite positive. Technology, future, robots, innovation, programmed learning. While bias is also now becoming stronger, that's more negative. I also see mistrust there. Oh, there's another dangerous also coming up.
Absolutely. Even mysterious, I think, computer operated disruption, computer controlled fear of machines. but also lots to do with medicine, precision medicine coming up, and proper diagnosis, which I think is probably one of the most exciting potential advances of AI.
Yeah, it's interesting, the mixture between the more positive and the more negative, between, for instance, innovation, but then also dangerous and bias.
So can I stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, shall we go to the, yes. Good. Well, I think thank you very much, Dr. Donnelly, for for hosting that for us. I think that's now a good way to kickstart our conversation. So, participants, if you've got any comments or questions, then please raise your hand, and then I will give you an opportunity to speak. And while we're waiting for the first hands to be raised, perhaps I will ask the first question to all three our presenters. My question is, if you can make a suggestion on how to improve our policy in South Africa with relation to AI in healthcare, what would that be? Any suggestion? And I will start with, well, in the order that we've had our presenters. I'll start with Dr. Donnelly.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the question.
Sorry.
I was chatting in the chat on
my question was, if you can make a suggestion on how to change South African law policy in any way, our law or policy regarding AI in healthcare, what would your suggestion be? Or is our current policies perfect?
No, I think our current policies are not perfect. And so my suggestion would be that we get the conversation started and moving forward with gusto as soon as possible. I think there's a lot of work to be done, both in relation to how we regulate software as a medical device and ensure safety and security and throughout the entire life cycle of AI software. And until we can trust the software, I think it's going to be difficult for patients and healthcare practitioners to begin to adopt these technologies, because there will be fears on both sides, and that's going to hold us back. So that would be my suggestion, that we deal with the regulatory conversation as soon as possible.
Thank you. Then over to Mr. Arowo Sekpe. If you can change anything, what would it be? I think while we're waiting for him, I will go over to Mr. Naidu. I'm sure you have.
I'm here.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. I said, like my presentation emphasizes the two areas: the development of AI itself. Policy need to address that, so that just like Dr. Donnelly just said, we can have AI systems and devices that are responsive, that are explainable, that are transparent, and removing the issue of bias. So if policy emphasis can be on both development and, of course, the legal concerns and ethical concerns in the usage of AI systems. So there's need for a comprehensive AI legal framework, out of a policy framework, so that we can address these issues specific to AI. Yes.
If I can ask you a follow-up question, and this might be too specific, you must tell me, but such a policy, should it take the form of an act of parliament, or should it be regulations in terms of an existing act, or should it simply be a policy that is issued by a government department as a soft law, basically as guidelines, but not enforceable in a court? What would your suggestion or your thinking be?
Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay, because the connection was dragging at a point. The first thing is to have a policy framework which give guidelines, because so that eventually now the legislation can now follow. But first, people need to sit down and come up with comprehensive policies to address these areas of concerns. But eventually, there will also be need for an act of parliament, in my own opinion.
Good, and well noted. Over to Mr. Naidu, the same question to you. You can change one thing, or perhaps more. What would your suggestion be on how to improve our policy regarding AI in healthcare?
Well, this is a bit of a complicated question for me. Most of my focus is just in the patent sphere, so I'd rather venture to stay there for now. I would think just adapting our IP laws to accommodate AI as being, the main thrust of inventorship going forward in the future would be one of what I would suggest be a welcome change. Maybe not inventorship in terms of patent law, but perhaps maybe even a sui generis type of protection for those inventions.
Personhood for artificial intelligence systems.
Ooh, this is a widely debated. This is a widely debated topic, but I do think that personhood for AI in the future will be something that will become more and more necessary, especially if we get to the point where artificial general intelligence is, really at play. As it stands, artificial general intelligence, by most people's accounts, will be here in the next 50 or so years, but you can never really tell because we're not really following Moore's laws anymore. We've already outpaced it. But I think that perhaps in the future, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, maybe 50, maybe 100, we'll look back at it and really think that what took us so long? There could be a solution to liability, for example.
I'm sure there are a number of people in the audience who would like to ask questions regarding liability. Thank you. So Mr. Scholze has his hand raised. Over to you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so first and foremost, thank you to each of the speakers for a very fascinating discussion. I think a number of questions have been raised. Perhaps just to go off the most recent discussion about how we might change the law or the policies if we could. The question that often comes into my mind in discussions of this nature are, what's the point? What is the impetus or what is the imperative for acknowledging, for example, an AI as an inventor, given that the patent system as it's set up is designed to incentivize humans, but it's not apparent that AI can be incentivized. So if, I'm not sure, some of the speakers were not clear on their position on this, but if the speakers are in favor of acknowledging AI inventorship, what's the rationale for it? And is there any evidence that it's for the best?
Thank you. I think we will start with Mr. Naidu.
Thanks so much, Bongi, for the question. I think what the main gist of the argument for AI inventorship has really revolved around is about really incentivizing the creation of these AI technologies. And to do that would be really to grant AI protections for the inventions to the human upstream. So it could be the owner or the user of the AI system itself. So it's not so much about incentivizing the AI system itself. It's more about creating an enabling environment for people to want to develop these kinds of systems so that they can be rewarded a patent for whatever invention that these systems then produce.
I see that there's a bit of a discussion in the chats about Davis and the food container invention. May I ask Kimani Goddard to perhaps share the thoughts with us, with everybody, if you're willing?
Okay, I'm not sure what more thoughts I could share. But I do a lot of work in analysis of biological patent data and biological data. And I build algorithms and I deploy them myself. And I wouldn't think that my algorithm would become an inventor. I have cleaned the data, I have selected the data, I have built the algorithm, and I have put it to use and say, you find me. In this case, I'm working on factor VIII and CFR genes. You find me links among these gene sequences and patents and biological data publications. All right, this is
your AI, that your program, your algorithm is a tool in your hand.
Dabas is a calculator, and so it's what I'm developing. So for you to be an inventor, and I also work in copyright in data and databases and sui generis database rights. And the idea that the idea that Dabas can be an inventor, when Dabas itself is data itself, the algorithm, its data is a slippery slope because of the regulations we have in copyright regarding ownership of data and databases and unique configurations in databases. So that this is a Pandora's box. The European Database Directive even goes further to say that your database need not be original, right? You simply need to have invested in it. So if you have that in combination with Dabas, which is an AI, which is an algorithm, which it itself is based on a copyright, right? Then you have a sort of Russian nesting doll situation, and the people behind it are people like me. I'm a lawyer, but I work with patent data, and you develop something and you think this thing should be an inventor. And the people talk about company law, but if you look at the structures around company law and the problems that you already have with company law, and how an AI would be similar to a company law, but you have to be able to pierce the corporate veil and see who's directing it, because a company is not autonomous. A company is never seen as autonomous.
Yes.
So this whole AI thing is, at this point in time, at the development of the technology, is a red herring. It is not technically an inventor. There are people developing these algorithms like me. I'm one of these people. And there are people, if you give an AI personality or even inventorship, the liability problems that arise from this are particularly detrimental. The property issues that arise from this are particularly problematic.
May I ask you there to explain what you think will be the liability and the property law consequences from recognizing AI as an inventor?
So then you come to the issue of responsibility, all right? And because an AI is not of the BIOS, it is not a biological entity. It is not self-directed. It is not really self-directed. We want it to be, but it is not. There are people behind it. There are people programming it. There are people determining what it will work on, how it will categorize the data that it is analyzing, and what kinds of values it will attribute to that data. Then when the results that it produces, if they're detrimental to certain groups of people, or detrimental to the environment, or they result in all other kinds of problems like costs to governments, costs to people like fines. For example, insurance companies already use algorithms, have been using for decades algorithms in their systems, and and the insurance companies for that reason have been one of the most vilified types of companies in the world, particularly in countries like the United States, where the way they operate, because they operate based on algorithms, are problematic. And they've been doing this for years. So algorithms are not new. Autonomous algorithms are not new that work according to certain categories that have been fed to them and data cleaned, right? And this kind of DABUS, and especially what in a food container, this is like, because I'm doing research to writing an algorithm. So no, the property aspect is that one, you have the property aspect and the liability aspect. The liability aspect is that DABUS is property. DABUS is not autonomous. No algorithm, no AI is autonomous. And the people behind it need to be responsible. And when you give it inventorship, this is the first prong of the legal basis to argue for personality, legal personality. And this is the second prong, then to develop something akin to the kind of company law structure, and then to have a thing where you can have a veil, where you cannot ask what's behind it, who's behind it, how the data is being collated and analyzed. So this is very problematic, where we live in societies that have natural societies where there are lots of prejudices against all kinds of groups, and computers don't know the difference. Computers don't know whether this is good or bad. They just replicate what they see around them. They replicate our prejudices actually much more powerfully than we would. So this is very problematic. There's a liability issue of people are responsible. The AI is not responsible. It is owned by someone. It is a machine owned by someone, and they are responsible. This is an attempt to create a legal loop that results in certain companies who own these very sophisticated calculators, which is what they are, very sophisticated calculators, to foist off legal and financial responsibility for the fallout of using AI for insurance, so on, insurance industry decisions, for banking in this decisions, because they are facing, many of these companies that use these technologies are now facing class action lawsuits for all kinds of decisions that are made based on algorithms that they develop. Okay, so this is a red herring. This is, I'm sorry to be passionate about it, but this is one of the most reprehensible cases.
I can hear your passion, and we always appreciate passionate contributions. So thank you very much. I see there are 3 people with their hands raised, but before I give the floor to them, I would just first want to ask anyone who have their hand raised, do you want to respond specifically to these comments, or do you intend to raise new points? If you want to respond, then I would like to let you go first while we're on this topic. If not, then I think I will just, out of fairness, want to give Mr. Naidu an opportunity to briefly respond regarding the issue of DABUS and inventorship. If you like to, Mr. Naidu.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Kimani. It's really, really interesting. I appreciate your comments. This will certainly go a long way in helping me with some of the work that I'm doing myself. I just wanted to clarify the issue of liability. It's my understanding that this is an issue for the applicant or the patentee, not so much the inventor. Could you please clarify where the inventor comes into this?
Okay, all right. Where the inventor comes into it, as you know, the inventor or the patentee, you're not necessarily clear who is going to implement the patent or commercialize the patent. Sometimes it's the patent owner, sometimes it's the inventor, sometimes it's a completely separate company, sometimes it's a university. So the idea, what I'm saying is the responsibility, wherever it lies on a human individual or group of human individuals, not a piece of sophisticated mathematics.
Good. So thank you for that answer. Mr. Naidoo, would you like to just briefly close this issue for us?
Yes. I had one follow-up question then. Kimani, would you then say that liability is only then attracted by the person, as per most patent acts, who practices or uses the invention, not by the inventor, him or herself, unless the inventor and the patentee or the applicant are one and the same person? Whereas in Darbus, the applicant was Dr. Stephen Thaler, and Darbus is listed as the inventor. So the AI system itself would not attract any legal liability. I think that these are two different concepts that should not actually be conflated. Inventorship and liability should not be conflated. And I think there is actually a lot of room to interpret the word inventor to give it an effect that would really solve a lot of the issues that countries are facing, or really achieve the aims that the countries are that the countries really wish to achieve in terms of their national policy, like South Africa. Just on the conceptualization note, I made a point of that conceptualization is one of the key tenets of inventorship, but really the conceptualization is only really used in when there's a dispute in terms of joint inventorship, when people really want to find out who is the actual inventor of an invention. It's not really a key tenet. And would you then say that, having listed that you are the programmer, etc., would you then say that you thus conceptualize the invention, even if the result of the AI system was unexpected to you?
Yes, that is exactly the case, because when you use the method of scientific investigation, you do not you hope for a certain number of variables and results, but the idea of scientific investigation is to remain open to results that you might not expect. So the fact that an AI produces results that you might not expect does not then make an AI an inventor. This line of reasoning it does not hold up for for determining or analyzing normal situations of inventorship where only human beings are involved, and it does not hold up for this one. And there is no conflation between the inventor and Mr. Thaler. Mr. Thaler is the inventor. He developed this system, he cleaned the data, he provided the data, he determined what the research program would be, and then he set his very sophisticated computer/calculator to work. So this is what happened.
Do you foresee a potential scenario in future where AI can be sufficiently autonomous to truly be an inventor, in your opinion?
In my opinion, it could be possible. It could be. And the reason I say could be, I don't want to say never, but could be. Because my approach to patent law is mainly from the biology and pharma level. And for me, inventing and what we invent as human beings, we are the only creatures on this planet doing this. We are inventing with a view to replicating, strengthening our own society, reproducing ourselves and our societies. So you have to understand the philosophical thing behind it, because law is also philosophy. Biology also has a basis in philosophy. So can an AI decide? So this is a thing that is coming out, especially from the copyright area, where huge databases of people's activities online are being used to direct their behavior. So can an AI decide what is the best biological research for researchers to engage in? This is where this is going. Can a non-sentient, and something that is not of the bios, something that is not a living being. It doesn't have life and death on its mind, because most of biological research, right, medical research, is its point is life and death. All right, this is the point. And AI does not understand it. It has no concept of this. And I don't see in the near future or even the medium future that you have an AI that has a possible concept of life and death, that it is also subject to life and death, because all of our research, scientific research, is based in that fact that we are subject to life and death. So for me, on that basis.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your opinion with us, and stay with us. Perhaps this topic will come up again, but I think for now, I think I've let a few people wait now for a while who had their hands raised. So I think first over to Vedanta Singh, please.
Thank you so much, Professor. This has been an incredible afternoon to have spent it in your company. The speakers, congratulations. That was great on all three accounts. I'm going to change direction a little bit and speak to what the first presenter, Dusty Lee Donnelly, was speaking about. I have a specific question around your thoughts on how South Africa, or indeed other African countries, are going to go about developing regulation and policy around how we use AI. And you mentioned in your presentation that we need to train our algorithms using sort of more data. And I wanted to just point out, and I think, forgive me, I think this is what you meant, but more data is not always a good thing. Rather, we need to look at training algorithms with representative data. So more data versus representative data is an example of something that South Africa can do differently than other countries. I don't feel like we can follow a blueprint of what a lot of the European countries have done, especially in terms of maybe not the policy, but the ethical applications of AI and the areas around values that we want to try and protect and create. So the question eventually that I had in my mind was, how do you think South Africa is going to do this differently? And let me see, do you think that when we develop these policies, we need to also include, for instance, software engineers, companies that are going to be designing these algorithms, as well as medical professionals? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Singh. Over to Dr. Donnelly.
Thank you very much. I think that's such an interesting question, Vedanta. And at one level, I don't think we're going to do anything different at the level of what ethical AI principles represent, the focus on human rights and values and transparency, I think, is an important framework within which we need to develop our own regulatory response in South Africa. And I absolutely agree with you that it is imperative that we have a multi-stakeholder-based approach. We can't have discussions amongst healthcare professionals that are isolated from people who are actually working with the databases, and then from the software developers themselves. In fact, I think, Professor Thalder, at some stage we need to look at setting up a colloquium in South Africa that can bring those two parties together, because we don't always necessarily speak the same language. What lawyers, sort of how we conceptualize the data protection and legal principles might be very different to how the developers of the technology think about the processes that they're following. But again, I don't think that's necessarily any different to what is happening in the rest of the world. So to get to the root of your question, I think a large part of the problem is something Mr. Naidu touched on, which is that these inventions are being patented outside of South Africa. So we're users of technology, we're not inventing and developing technology. And the data sets, which is something that the second speaker mentioned, may not be representative of South African populations. There's an inherent data bias. So I think that is possibly the most important area where we need to focus our policy efforts. I don't know if that's answered your question. I hope it has. I have a follow-up question from it, but I'll just let you know, clarify if I've addressed your question first.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think I was actually getting to the point that we need to have a lot more people in the room when we are discussing policy. And it's really tough to do because it's a little bit of a fragmented landscape at the moment if you're trying to look at people in South Africa working on AI. And you're very right in that it is something that's coming from, beyond our shores, for instance. But I think you're correct. It's not going to be reinventing the wheel. We have a lot of great policies to follow example of. I think we need to sit in a room with a lot of different voices that represent how we're going to work with it at the end of the day in a clinic situation or setting. So you have answered my question. Thank you.
Excellent. Good. Let's go over to Mr. Benjamin Adebisi, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and I sincerely appreciate the presenters and the policies advisors. AI, artificial intelligence in healthcare, has actually come to stay because in countries like the United States of America, in the United Kingdom, and in China, AI has come to stay. AI has been used. 66% from statistics of the medical practitioner actually trust the AI. However, the AI is not cannot be completely autonomous because there has to be a incorporation of humans with the technology. We don't just stand in front of the computer, input our data, because there are definitely going to be false positives where we have the test not being positive in real time, but the computer giving a positive result. We could also have false negatives. These are a lot of cons, some negative ideas that could actually come from. But we don't have to actually be skeptical completely on artificial intelligence because it has come to stay. If you look at the advantages of what we see from incorporating artificial intelligence to our healthcare, like the healthcare, as we know, it's not completely on diagnosis and treatment of diseases. There are research, drug development, and others. And we believe that we trust the artificial intelligence that actually expedite the processes of drug development, of research, rather than what humans have to go through longer time or longer years because of the trained algorithm and data being inputted into the computer. We have a kind of efficient or more effective way of presenting results or predicting outcomes of results, which humans will not be because we are limited. So we don't have to actually develop skepticism towards the technology. We should be certain that our policies should be towards promoting artificial intelligence. However, we look at the negative aspects too, like right to work. AI is not going to actually take away work from humans. However, with the development of AI, humans are known to advance and not to evolve in their several technologies. So we're going to be creating jobs. For example, the AI technology will include software, hardware, and some infrastructures. So we're going to be creating jobs. The policy should be towards supporting AI that definitely we are not taking the jobs from humans to give it to the machine. AI involves a lot of infrastructures, a lot of mode of operation that has to involve humans involvement. So what we need to do is to encourage our policymakers to initiate education towards understanding AI, maybe like software design, infrastructures, and creation of several methods or approaches that will actually facilitate the use of AI and to improve it. Because we can't, because of negative aspect of it. Of course, we accept to the fact that privacy could be compromised. Hacking of data and all that, it happens. Even in Olympics, where the Russian Federation hacked into the athletes of the United States, the athletes in the United States, and start giving some private health privacy reports, and such actually created some form of psychological distress on the athletes. However, they didn't rule out the fact that we still have to input our personal data, health data, into the computer. So we should tell our policymakers, or to advise our policymakers, to learn to develop improved method on data security so that privacy won't be compromised. So we have so much skepticism, we have so much insight into the negative aspect, into the damages, or into our fears about the technology. We might not be able to really move with it. And the world is evolving. Several parts of the world, of developed nations, are into the use of artificial intelligence. In Brazil, telemedicine is actually in place. Where, in fact, when I was in Cotonou, I was traveling to the Netherlands, I had some of the patients, I'm into the health research in New York, that will call me and tell me this is what the doctor said, and we will diagnose. That's telemedicine. So we can't rule it out. What we should need to know is how well we initiate the education, incorporate the knowledge of artificial intelligence into our system, and see how we can, develop and protect, minimize our negativity. So that's what we should be thinking about, because if we put so much energy into our fears, into what negativity, this could bring about, we might not be able to move forward. And the other parts of the world are actually moving ahead in artificial intelligence. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. I think the main points, or my take-home message from what you've said, is that education is absolutely essential to take this forward. Dr. Donnelly, you have your hand raised. Over to you.
Thank you. I had a question which was prompted by the discussion with Vedanta earlier around more data, meaning more representative data. And this is really a question addressed to the second speaker, Mr. Arosegbe. Around his presentation, he raised this really important issue of the discriminatory outcomes, or potential discrimination and potential data bias, separate but related concepts. And if I understood him correctly, I think he said that having complete data could remove discrimination. And I may not have fully understood what he was getting at, but I want to ask if, in fact, it's not a dangerous assumption that representative data is necessarily reliable and safe to use. In short, could we have a situation where even if you have a complete, accurate, and representative data set, that could still perpetuate discrimination based on existing structural inequalities? I'll give an example that is completely unrelated to healthcare, and it was a debate I was having. I teach the subject of insurance law, and Ms. Goddard raised insurers and the notorious use of algorithms earlier. So we were having this discussion around risk profiling and the effect or the impact that it has on the premium paid by the policyholder. And it appears to be such an objectively rational process. Inputs go in based on accurate facts collected. And yet the argument is that that can perpetuate existing structural inequalities. If more Black people live in a particular area and that area is flagged as higher risk, then inevitably they are paying higher premiums. There have been examples reported in the healthcare sector. There was a report, and again, I'm not entirely familiar with what's happening in the healthcare sector in the US, but there was a report from the US that hospital administrative programs were using AI to identify patients that needed to be referred on for advanced care. And when researchers looked at that, they discovered a hidden bias. Even though the data that was being used was accurate, it assumed or it assigned a lower risk score to Black patients based on the fact that their, as I understand it, their average health costs were lower. So anyway, it was just a question I wanted to pose to the second speaker about how this impacts on the discussions around using AI in healthcare. Yes, we can check our data sets are complete and accurate, but how do we ensure that they don't perpetuate discriminatory outcomes?
Thank you for that question. Very, very probing. Let's hear.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Dr. Donnelly. I hope I'm up to the task. But my immediate response now is that, yes, representative data is a way forward in eliminating data bias. But then we should understand that the issue of bias is very natural to we humans. We are biased in ways that we do not even know. That even when it is being pointed out, one will be shocked that, so I am biased in this area. Because being biased is a function of our background, our experience, our orientation, our worldview, the way we have learned to see things. All these things reflect in the way we process data. But if we are careful of those prejudices in selecting data, then and we intentionally make sure that we eliminate those types of data bias that I've identified. I identify about 5 or 6 data types of data bias: sample bias, exclusion bias, measurement bias, report bias, racial bias, observer bias. So if we consciously seek to take care of those data biases or types of biases, then we can actually move forward. But at the end of the day, is the extent to which we are able to eliminate it. It's not as if that we can completely eliminate bias, because bias itself, a determination of using A and not B, is a bias decision. But the issue of bias becomes prominent when it affects someone negatively, or it affects a particular category of people negatively. Then it becomes an issue of concern. So that's what we should watch out for in selecting data. I don't know, but I hope I've attempted to answer the question a little bit.
Well, thank you for that answer. I want to pose a question. There has been quite a lot of debate globally about AI in healthcare and ethics. And I know that the WHO has been working on a report on the ethical aspects, and I think also regarding the regulatory aspects of AI in healthcare. So my question is the following. Do you think that the ethical values regarding AI in healthcare would be the same ethical values in different parts of the world? So would it be would the same ethical values be relevant in Europe as in Africa, South Africa specifically, and the same as in China? And if the answer is yes, that the same ethical values are applicable, then the follow-up question is, but will they weigh the same relative to each other as they weigh elsewhere in the world? I don't know, Mr. Arawa Segbe, if you would like to answer this question first, and any of the other panelists or participants who has an opinion on this, it would be appreciated.
Okay, maybe I will go first, and then
yes,
others can join in. Well, ethical values may be universal, and they may also be specific, because ethics are morals, and morals, well, depending on the theoretical school one affiliate or subscribes to, morals, if in law we talk of the natural school that talks of universality of some moral laws. So, but in essence, in practical terms, some morals are specific to each society, so that what weighs more in one society may not weigh that much in another society. So yes, there should be a baseline of ethical values across each society, but the extent to which they are emphasized in each society obviously will differ. That's my immediate response.
Thank you. Would any of our other participants or well, any of our other presenters or participants like to weigh in on this question? The matter of ethical values, to what extent is it universal in the context of AI and healthcare, and to what extent does it differ between different jurisdictions, cultures, and so on? If you'd like to weigh in on this, then please raise your hand. While we're waiting, I can pose another question as well. Perhaps I must just ask, how many are there any AI developers or entrepreneurs here in the audience? If so, if you could just indicate to me either in the chat or because I see that Mr. Ujewe has his hand raised. I imagine you would like to respond to the issue of ethics. But I would very much like to know if there are any entrepreneurs or AI developers, because the question that I would like to ask them is, from your perspective as an entrepreneur or an AI developer, how would you like policy to change in South Africa to promote the responsible use of AI in healthcare? But while people can think about that, let's first go over to Mr. Ujewe, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning from where I am. I am not an AI expert, but I am an ethics expert, and my specialty is on cross-cultural bioethics. And the idea is to cross the line between what was previously perceived as universal in the line of ethics, which got translated into bioethics and became kind of a universal bioethics. But further down the line, we're beginning to see that no, we don't have that kind of universality that was presupposed at the beginning. So there could be some universal baseline in morality. That is the idea, the ideal that we all might want to aspire to somewhere in the abstract world. But on the ground, where we have the ethics, context becomes very crucial. So we have, broadly speaking, not that this is what actually happens in every single part of the Western world, You can have a broad blanket and say, well, there's much higher tendency towards the individual person, asserting the individual person. And when you look at context in sub-Saharan Africa, you would realize there is much more leaning towards community. It's not that the individual is so important either way. So the point here is, when you are looking at ethics, what it is that we should do, or what is the right thing to do, it would vary in every context, and sometimes actually even significantly. So look at COVID. In some parts of the world, there's serious argument over rights, and which is aggravated by just wear a mask. And someone says, well, I have a right. And that is because in that society, there is a strong leaning towards individual rights. Now, you have another part of the world where even before you say wear a mask, everybody says, oh yeah, I'm going to wear a mask. Nobody even, it's not a conversation. And nobody's thinking about rights, because most people are thinking, okay, well, how do we protect everybody else? It's about the community orientation. And embedded in each individual is an ethical construct. So we have that ethical construct within us, depending on what context we happen to be in. And that defines how we proceed. And so ethics, morality may have a universal basis, but when you come to the expression of that morality in practical life, in non-ideals, under non-ideal conditions, in real life context, then the ethics now comes into the fore, and that's where context becomes really crucial. So that idea of universal ethics, it's kind of a predominant idea that we are trying to decolonize, because that is where the original idea of philosophical ethics started, with those direction. And of course, those of us who get trained in that tradition start from there, but then later on, then you begin to see that there are variances, and then it's not the same. So I think I would just leave it there, yes.
Mr. Ajewe, if I can quickly ask you, from where are you?
Okay, I'm based in Canada with the Canadian Institutes of Health Research.
Okay, okay.
Yes. And as a senior research ethics advisor.
Okay. Are you familiar with Ubuntu as a
yes,
as a value system? And well, and if you are, I don't want to put pressure on you. It would just be interesting to hear how you think that can fit into this debate.
So I would say yes, because I am partly trained in that tradition. So I did my philosophy starting in Zimbabwe, and that is where I built my construct on both on the Western idea of utilitarianism and all that, and then we're countering it with the idea of things like Ubuntu coming from the African side, and then begin to move upward in the applied context, like we're talking about AI right now. And if you're talking about autonomy and thinking, okay, well, AI is not human, in another part of the world where there is a high emphasis on rights, it may be easier to lean in that direction. But in another part of the world where we have community as center, then we're always thinking, well, AI is part of the community. Somebody formed AI. So if someone misbehaves in a community, we're thinking, well, you misbehave, or you, whose child are you? You come from somebody. So if you have AI, the AI that mixes up things, or AI that has some intrinsic biases, we're thinking, who are the inventors of this AI that has that bias? And then the blame doesn't stop with AI. The blame moves beyond. It goes to the community, to where this is coming from. And I think that's, if you look at it going down to the ethics, that is how the conception kind of emerges and evolves as it goes into the real world of AI. That is how I would view that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Participants. Any would any, well, I've asked whether there are any AI developers or AI entrepreneurs who would like to share with us what they think how policy should be improved in the South African context. Would anybody like to have the stage regarding that question? If not, any other comments or queries? Our presenters, would you like to have any final word at this stage to conclude our workshop? Mr. Ujewe has his hand raised. Over to him.
Thank you very much. And sorry, just on a brief note, I was very impressed with the perspective that Kimani, I think Kimani Goddard was given about the unautonomy of AI. And to link that to Ubuntu, Ubuntu being a person is a person through other persons. You cannot be a person if there are no other persons around you. And I'm going to link that and saying from the ethics perspective and Ubuntu is that AI is AI only through humans. Or AI is only AI where there's a human community. We cannot have AI if there is no human community. So if we're going to hold AI accountable for anything, then it automatically goes to the human community that forms that AI. And I think that's where Ubuntu becomes a very strong ethical kind of value or lens by which to look at AI.
Thank you, Mr. Ujewe. Our presenters, I would like to give each one of you just an opportunity for a last word in summary. Dr. Donnelly, may I start with you, please?
Thank you very much, Professor Thalda, and thank you for organizing this really interesting event. I suppose I would like to leave my closing remarks on this topic of AI as human-centered. I think it's an important point and a good one to close on. So I would reiterate the policy imperatives I started my presentation with, that I think may differ from culture to culture and community to community in how they implemented, which is why it's so important that we actually bring inventorship to Africa, that we are developing the technologies. But the policy imperative is that AI should benefit people. It should be designed in a way that respects human values. And I think that is an important ethical principle that we need to keep at the forefront of everything that we do.
Thank you very much. Then over to Mr. Arowa Sekpe, please.
Thank you, Prof. I want to pick from where Mr. Ujewe stopped on whether an AI entity can be regarded as being autonomous or can be given legal personality. I think from my own opinion, it's better, as I'm considering the development of AI technology as at now, it's better to regard it as property. And because as of now, there's really nothing yet autonomous about AI-enabled systems. A human being or human beings are involved, and human beings should bear the liability, not an AI, an artificial, we call it artificial, an artificial entity. As at now, I think that should be a reasonable, the most reasonable position to hold. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So lastly, over to Mr. Naidu.
Thank you so much, Professor Thalda. I'd just like to thank everyone that participated in this, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss some of these ideas. I'm definitely going to take into consideration some of the comments that were made. I think that they're very valuable. Just my closing topic on this, I just really think that we're going through a really exciting period, and while trying not to overplay what AI is and what it could become, I do think that legal reform in many different fields needs to actually happen to really capitalize on what the technology has to offer. And I think that was the main gist of what I was trying to get at with allowing inventorship. Remember as well, I also think that perhaps even maybe sui generis protection should be an option that could be explored in the future. Anything that really puts human flourishing at the forefront, which is what I think all the presenters have agreed on. So thank you so much.
Presenters and participants, thank you very much for your participation in this workshop. And I'm going to say goodbye, and I hope that you've got a very productive week.